Hello and welcome to the show. Today's topic is Ejb 3.1 and Weblogic 12c, both the latest of this current time that we are speaking. As you can see here, this is called OEPE, the Oracle flavor of Eclipse, which you can find in a 1.2 gigabyte package at Oracle's website, which contains everything. And it'll make you configure this Oracle Weblogic server. It won't be there for you, so you can just improvise and figure that out. And once we got that, we'll say hi to it and hit start. And once it's up, Weblogic doesn't like to hold on to naked beans. It doesn't like to hold on to bean modules. But what it does like is to hold on to an EAR file. So we're going to create an enterprise application project and stuff everything we're about to create inside of this wrapper. So we're going to call this EAR proj. Very simple, just hit finish. Now that we have an EAR project, let's stuff an Ejb jar into it. An Ejb module, or you can think of it as a jelly bean jar, we'll call this Ejb module. And since we already have an EAR up, add project to an EAR. Make sure EAR proj is in this box and hit finish. And since Eclipse likes to automate things, it also creates a client for us for this entire application while we created the Ejb module. So what the client does, it does more than just run our code. In this case, EAR is going to hold the client, and the client's going to hold our interfaces. So the Ejb module itself is not going to hold any interfaces. It's going to rely on the client to hold on to it, which is convenient because at your workplace, if anyone ever asks you for a copy of the client code, you can just rip it out of the EAR. It'll be the official client, and they can just start programming on it because it already has all of the local and remote interfaces. And what the client usually uses to run is a basic main class. So let's create a class called main. And be sure to check public static void main and hit finish. And inside this main is where most of the magic will happen later. But for now, our Ejb module is missing beans. So let's add it session beans. Session beans is like the basic warrior average guy in the bean world. And we're going to put it all in the package called com.coolstory. And the bean name is going to be called the bean. And here we come to the most, in my opinion, confusing concept of Ejbs, deciding when to use local and remote. Local is when the place you're calling the bean from is in the same application as the bean, and you can use local. And that way you can skip all of the RMI overhead, the setup and breakdown of connections, which can be costly. So if you use remote in a local setting, you're wasting resources. But Ejbs essentially were created for the purpose of remote invocation. That was its basic purpose. So we're going to do the big boy stuff and get a real sense of how it feels in the real world by checking remote. Later we'll add the local. Keep in mind that many servers now don't require interface at all, but it still clears things, makes it more simple for us to separate code if we still have this. I think Weblogic requires it. And inside of the bean remote interface, we're going to make a promise to say something when we talk to it. So we're going to make a method signature named say hi, and it's going to return a string. Pretty basic. No body here yet because it's just an interface. And when we say that, this X is going to come up in the actual bean itself, and it's going to want to implement unimplemented methods. So here we add meet to the body of the method, and when we talk to it, we want it to say, hi, I am Mr. Bean. And we'll save that, and that was pretty quick, and that's pretty much it for this, except one more thing, which is vendor specific. Weblogic likes it when you use the attribute called mapped name. It loves that parameter. This is basically the bean ID or name you're going to use to look it up using JNDI. So we're going to name it Mr. Bean and save it, and we're done here. And we will go back to the main, our client, and you'll see this a lot in Ejb examples, is the context object, but it's just a general interface project. What we're going to give it is a more specific initial context, and it's going to take a parameter of p, which is short for properties. Back then we used hash tables, which are synchronized, so might be because it's slower, I don't know, but I think we stopped using them and switched over to properties, which is a basic map. It has two slots, one for key, one for value. So we'll give it a new properties. And Weblogic won't play with you unless you say two things. You have to start small talk, and it wants you to say at least 2 sentences. Give it 2 basic pieces of information before it lets you connect. And those pieces of information, the first thing is the URL of the server, which is localhost. And it'll be easier if I don't explain this part and just watch context dot provider URL, all in caps. And here we're going to give it the server URL. So instead of HTTP, like when you go to a website, Weblogic does its remoting in something called T3, and it's going to be localhost, and its default port is 7001. So that's good for that parameter. And the next thing we need is something you don't really have to care about, but you need to paste it in every time, which is the initial context factory and the ID that comes with it, which is weblogic.jndi.weblogic initial context factory. So like I said, you don't really have to care about what this means, but it's going to expect that line every time. And down here, initial context is going to want to be imported, and it's still going to have an error because it wants to be surrounded in a try-catch. Now that we got CTX and all that good stuff, we can use it to go fetch the bean remote. And the reason we don't fetch the bean is because the whole purpose is to fetch the remote interface and let it handle the rest. So ctx.lookup, and this is where all the JNDI magic happens. Remember back in the bean we gave it the name Mr. Bean and mapped name property. We're going to go ahead and paste that in here. The next thing you need to put in is the hash or pound key. And the next thing is the full package name of the interface you're trying to get. So it's going to be com.coolstory.thebeanremote. So com.coolstory.thebeanremote. And it's going to return a basic object that we're going to go ahead and grab, the bean remote. We'll call it bean. And it's going to want to be casted to the bean remote and imported. So now that we have a handle to the bean object, earlier it promised to say hi to us when we talk to it. So that's what it's going to do. But it's going to return a string, so we need to print that out. So type out systrace, control space, and that turns it into a system out print line. We're going to go ahead and drag bean.sayHi down into this output. Alright, so all looks good and well. The code should be good, but first we have to deploy everything to the server. We see that the ear project shows up here, and it's in the process of loading it up, and it looks like it's done. It says synchronized. So inside, it's holding the Ejb module, which is the jelly bean jar, and the client, which holds the interfaces. So now that our bean is on the server and we're ready to call it with this main here, let's go ahead and right click on main, run as normal Java application, and see what happens. We're going to get an error here because the client needs a jar provided by Oracle in order to connect. So we're going to go to properties, Java build path, go to the libraries, and some people see it, I also see it. The Weblogic system library sort of gets in the way. Not sure why, maybe it's outdated, but we'll go ahead and just remove it. It'll be out of our way, and we'll add our jar we have in mind. So on my Mac, it installs it at users, my Mac name, Oracle, middleware, Weblogic server 12.1, server, lib. Pretty long way there, but we scroll down to the W section and we see a bunch of clients. We're not sure what they do, and we don't really care right now. But what I've seen works is wlthin t3 client.jar. Sounds promising, always does its job for me. We'll click open, and we'll see it appear right here. When we click OK, we'll see it also appear in the client. Alright, so now that we have that, right click on main again, run as Java application. And we see that we intended to print main.main and bean.sayHi. So down here, this is what we get. Main.main, hi, I am Mr. Bean, from the bean who says, hi, I am Mr. Bean. Next thing on the list, I bet you've seen the Ejb annotation. A lot of people get tripped up by it because it's not totally well known, but you can't use it just anywhere. It only gets used in certain supported places. And those two places, there might be three, but I know of two offhand, is the servlet or another bean. So if you shove this in this regular main class, it's not going to work out. No matter how much you try to use it, it's going to give you a null pointer exception. There might be a workaround to it, but I don't know of one. All I know is we have to move this at Ejb to a servlet, which is a more acceptable place for that annotation. So we're going to right click on earproj, new, dynamic web project where servlets tend to live. We're going to name that servlet with an A, and also add it to the earproj and hit finish. Once we have that down here, it's just an empty web project. Doesn't have a servlet yet, so right click on it, new, and give it a servlet. And we'll name that servlet Pango, and put it in the package com.servlet, and hit finish. So now we have a basic servlet that comes up. So let's go ahead and declare our @Ejb. And we're gonna try to call the bean remote from here using this annotation. And we're gonna call it remo. And import @Ejb. And since servlet is new, it doesn't know about client yet, so it doesn't know about the bean remote interface. So it's not gonna let you import it directly. But if you go down here, fix project setup, Eclipse is gonna ask to do it for you. So just hit OK, and it'll just be done. And down here in the do get, we'll go ahead and print that out. Remo says Remo dot say hi. So I'm not sure if this will work yet, but let's go and try it out. The context path is servlet, and the servlet is /pango, so it'll be servlet /pango. So localhost, the port is 7001 /servlet /pango. Right, we have an error. Let's check that out. That's because probably need to redeploy. So right click on earproj, run as, run on server. It looks like it finished. Let's try refreshing. Alright, here we go. Remo says, hi, I am Mr. Bean. And we did that by just using @Ejb, declaring the interface, and directly using it. So it does it all behind the scenes for us, and it lets us do that because this is a servlet. If you look in the manual, it'll agree that servlets are the proper place to put this annotation, or inside other beans. And we're going to do one more thing. Like we said earlier, we're going to use local beans. So right click on Ejb module, the bean jar, and give it session bean. Put it in the same com.coolstory package. Give it the name, the local, and check local. So down in the client, we're going to see the local interface, and we're going to make it promise to say something again. So it's going to return a string, and it's going to say something, anything really. I'm going to save it, and over at the local, this X error comes up and wants to implement. And it's going to say, since it's local, I am very close. And we'll save that and go back over to the servlet. And we will use it. See what it's like to use a local bean. The local, loca, just to be confusing. And it's going to want to be imported as well. So down here, we just copy. Loca says, what will Loca say? It'll say something. We'll save it. Right click on the big mothership adder onion layer wrapper, earproj, run as again to redeploy. It looks like it's done. So, it might be all in the same line, but I guess we don't care. So let's refresh it. Alright, so Remo says, hi, I am Mr. Bean. And Loca says, I am very close. So we see it all works out pretty well, and all we did was use @Ejb. So that's a big step forward, because it's hard to learn when and where to use local, remote, when to use annotations, when to use JNDI calls. but we figured all those things out pretty well here. And for our final trick, we'll go ahead and restart the server, give it a refreshing start, so that we can look at it in the console, because for a lot of you, the server is brand new, and we all like to see the GUI console. It's pretty fun. %. And the reason people use EJBs instead of just Spring or something is because most vendors let you cluster EJBs pretty easily, like almost automatically. And for Spring beans, maybe not so much support. That's why. So even though EJB feels harder and more heavyweight, it really isn't really heavyweight, it just feels that way. But I don't know. It's worth the effort, I think. So once it's done, we go into localhost 7001 and type in console, which is how you get in. And when you installed the 1.2 gigabyte package or the server, it asked you for a username and password, and that's what I have here. And click login. And it's a standard admin console. It looks kind of like Glassfish because Oracle is in charge of this and Glassfish. And inside, we go to servers, admin server, deployments, and here's our project, earproj, our beautiful enterprise application. So its state is active and it's healthy. It's an enterprise application. And all looks well. And as said earlier, if you had a jar you wanted to deploy manually, you can just hit install, and this is where you would do it. Pretty cool also. So I hope that satisfied your need to learn EJBs. Maybe you're forced to use it at work or something. And the only alternative was finding EJB videos and seeing that most of them were about 2.x, or having to read 400 to 700 page books. So I hope this was a relief in that area, and I'll see you later.